Ethan Ramirez lived a quiet life in a small neighborhood just outside the city. He was 34 years old and worked from home as a software engineer. His job allowed him to set his own hours, so he usually started early, had lunch around noon and finished up by late afternoon. After work, he liked to tinker with gadgets, especially smart home devices. His house was full of cameras, lights that turned on by themselves, and even a speaker system that played soft music when he walked into a room. To most people, Ethan seemed like a normal guy, friendly, polite, and always ready to help out a neighbor. He kept his yard neat, paid his bills on time, and never caused any trouble. But one thing he didn't like was when people tried to tell him how to live. He believed in rules, but only fair ones. The neighborhood Ethan lived in had something called an HOA, Homeowners Association. That meant there were certain rules everyone had to follow, like how high your grass could grow, what color you could paint your mailbox, and even when you had to take down your holiday decorations. Most people didn't mind these rules too much. They helped keep things looking nice and running smoothly. But then came Barbara Jennings. Barbara wasn't always the HOA president, but when she became one, things changed fast. People started calling her HOA Karen behind her back because she made a lot of noise over very small things. She'd walk through the neighborhood with a clipboard, taking notes and photos like she was doing detective work. If someone's trash bin was out a few minutes too early, she'd send them an email. If a kid left a bike on the lawn, she'd knock on the door and demand it be moved right away. At first, Ethan didn't pay much attention to her. He followed the rules already, so he figured they wouldn't cross paths. But he was wrong. One day, Barbara sent him an email. The subject line said, "Violation Notice, Rule 4.3b. Ethan opened it and read that he had broken a rule about having holiday lights up past January 15th. He checked his calendar and realized he had taken them down a little late, only by a week or two. He shrugged it off and replied politely, thanking her for pointing it out and saying it wouldn't happen again. He thought that was the end of it. But Barbara didn't let go so easily. A few days later, another email came in. This time she accused him of not trimming the bushes along the sidewalk properly. Ethan went outside and looked at them. They were fine, neat, and short. He wrote back again, explaining that he had trimmed them just a week ago, and offered to send her a photo if she wanted proof. She didn't reply. Instead, the next morning, Ethan saw Barbara walking past his house, staring at his bushes. Then she took a picture. Later that day, he got yet another email, this time with a photo attached of his trash bins. She claimed they weren't lined up straight enough on the curb. Ethan began to feel frustrated. These weren't real problems. He knew other neighbors who had broken bigger rules and never heard a word from Barbara. But now it felt like she was watching him more closely than anyone else. Still, he tried to stay calm. He answered each email, politely, fixed whatever she pointed out, and even added a friendly note at the end asking if there was anything else he could do to make sure everything was okay. Barbara never responded warmly. Her replies were cold and formal, and the emails kept coming. Then one day, she sent him a message saying he had violated a rule about the angle of his satellite dish. Ethan stared at the screen in disbelief. His satellite dish? It was mounted on the side of his house exactly where the company had placed it. He hadn't touched it since installation. He finally decided enough was enough. He replied to her email and told her in a firm but respectful way that he would not be adjusting the dish and that if she had any proof of a violation, she should contact the HOA board directly. He copied the board members on the email so they knew what was happening. That was the last straw for Barbara. From that point on, she seemed to target Ethan constantly. She showed up at his house uninvited to inspect his fence paint. She emailed him 3 times a week about minor issues. Once, she even reported him to the city for having a messy garage, even though his garage door was closed and nothing was visible from the street. Ethan started feeling like he was living under a microscope. He wasn't doing anything wrong, but it felt like he was being punished for standing up to her. He talked to some of his neighbors, and they all agreed. Barbara had gone too far. Some of them had similar stories. One woman said Barbara once yelled at her son for riding his skateboard on their driveway. Another man said she threatened to report him for having a bird feeder because it might attract pests. But no one did anything. Everyone was afraid of getting on Barbara's bad side. Ethan decided to protect himself. He already had a strong security system, but now he upgraded it. He added more cameras, motion sensors, and even an AI-powered alarm system that could detect aggressive voices and automatically call the police if needed. He didn't expect to ever use it. He just wanted to be safe. He also wanted proof that he wasn't imagining things, that Barbara was really going too far. And soon, he would get that proof. Because one afternoon while he was working in his office, he heard a loud crash from the front of the house. It sounded like something had fallen or been kicked. He stood up, confused. Was it a delivery? No, the doorbell hadn't rung. He walked toward the living room and saw that his front door was wide open. Standing inside was Barbara. She had kicked the door in. She was holding her clipboard and shouting, demanding to speak to him about a new violation. Ethan was stunned. He told her she couldn't just come into his house like that. He asked her to leave, but she refused. She stepped further in, looking around like she owned the place. She pointed at his bookshelf and said it was blocking a fire exit. Then she said she was filing a complaint about his air conditioner making too much noise. Ethan tried to stay calm, but his heart was pounding. He told her again to leave. When she didn't, he backed away and grabbed his phone. He didn't call the police himself. His smart home system did it for him. Within seconds, emergency alerts were sent out. The AI detected an unauthorized entry and an aggressive voice. It triggered a silent alarm. The local SWAT team was dispatched. Lights flashed outside his house moments later. Barbara didn't know what was happening. She thought she was just giving Ethan a hard time, like always. But this time she had gone too far, and she was about to find out exactly how serious that mistake was. Ethan stood frozen for a moment, heart pounding in his chest. Barbara was still shouting, waving her clipboard like it was some kind of weapon. She had kicked in his front door, and now she was walking around like she owned the place. He couldn't believe what was happening. It felt like something out of a bad movie. He looked down at his phone. The smart home app on the screen showed red flashing alerts. Unauthorized entry detected. Voice aggression level high. Calling emergency services. The system wasn't just recording everything. It was already sending real-time video and audio to the police. Ethan knew this would help him prove what was going on, but he didn't expect things to escalate so quickly. Outside, the quiet neighborhood suddenly came alive with sound. Sirens screamed through the streets. Neighbors peeked out their windows, curious about what was happening. Then within minutes, 3 police cars pulled up in front of Ethan's house. Red and blue lights spun wildly across the walls of his home. Barbara finally stopped talking. She looked confused, then nervous. "What is this?" she asked, her voice cracking slightly. Ethan took a deep breath and tried to stay calm. "You kicked in my door and refused to leave," he said. "I told you to go, and you wouldn't listen." Before she could respond, officers rushed inside with guns drawn. They shouted for everyone to put their hands where they could be seen. Ethan slowly raised his arms, showing he wasn't a threat. Barbara froze, eyes wide, her clipboard slipping from her hands and falling to the floor with a loud thud. One officer stepped forward and asked Ethan what was going on. He explained that Barbara had forced her way into his home and ignored his requests for her to leave. He told them she had been harassing him for weeks over small, made-up violations. As he spoke, another officer tapped into the live feed from Ethan's security system. The footage clearly showed Barbara kicking the door open and entering without permission. Audio picked up every word she had said, her yelling, her threats, and her refusal to leave. The officers looked at each other. One of them radioed in more details while the others kept an eye on Barbara, who was clearly beginning to panic. "You don't understand," she said, trying to explain herself. "I'm HOA president. I have the right to inspect properties if there are rule violations." The lead officer shook his head. "Ma'am, you do not have the right to break into someone's home. That's called trespassing, and depending on how aggressive you were, it might even be assault." She opened her mouth to argue, but no words came out. Her face turned pale. The officers placed her in handcuffs. She didn't resist. As they led her outside, Neighbors gathered along their sidewalks and driveways, watching in stunned silence. Some whispered among themselves. Others filmed the scene on their phones. Ethan followed the officers out and watched as Barbara was placed into the back of a patrol car. She avoided looking at anyone, especially him. Once the excitement died down, the officers thanked Ethan for cooperating and collecting such clear evidence. "Your setup here is pretty impressive," one of them said. "Most people don't have this kind of protection." Ethan nodded. "It's not just about protection," he said. "It's about being able to show the truth when someone tries to push you around." Later that night, after the police had gone and the neighborhood had returned to normal, Ethan sat alone in his living room. His front door was broken, and he'd have to fix it tomorrow. But for the first time in weeks, he felt at peace. He scrolled through social media and saw that someone had already posted part of the video from the street. The headline read, "HOA Karen kicks door in, calls SWAT on herself." The post was blowing up. Over the next few days, the story spread fast. News outlets picked it up. Talk shows discussed it. People online shared clips of the footage, laughing at Barbara's dramatic downfall. Memes started popping up too, some funny, some not so much. But most people agreed on one thing: she had gone too far. The HOA released a statement saying Barbara had acted on her own and did not represent the organization. They apologized to Ethan and offered to pay for the damage to his door. They also promised to review their leadership structure and make changes so something like this wouldn't happen again. Local lawmakers began discussing new rules about how HOA officials should behave and what power they really had. Some suggested limits on how closely they could monitor residents or how many complaints they could file before being investigated themselves. Meanwhile, Ethan became something of a local hero. Tech blogs reached out to ask about his smart home system. Security companies wanted to feature his story in advertisements. Civil rights groups used it as an example of how regular people could protect themselves against abuse of power. But Ethan didn't want to become famous. He just wanted to live peacefully again. Still, he realized something important. Technology had changed the game. Before, someone like Barbara could bully a neighbor for weeks and get away with it because there was no proof. Now with cameras, sensors, and AI systems, the truth could be recorded and shared instantly. That gave everyday people more control than ever before. As for Barbara, she disappeared from public view. Rumor had it she was facing legal charges for breaking into Ethan's house. She lost her position as HOA president almost immediately. Some said she moved out of the neighborhood entirely. Ethan never heard from her again. A few weeks later, he posted a short message on his social media account. He didn't want to stir up more drama, but he thought it was worth sharing. Sometimes standing up for yourself isn't about fighting back. Sometimes it's just about making sure the truth can be seen. And these days, the truth has a lot of ways to speak. People liked the post. A lot of them commented, thanking him for sharing his experience and encouraging others to protect themselves. Life went on. Ethan fixed his front door. He added even more security features to his system. Not out of fear, but out of respect for what had happened. He started a small blog where he talked about smart home tech, privacy, and how to deal with people who try to control you unfairly. And every once in a while, when he walked past his front door, he remembered the day someone tried to walk all over him and ended up getting caught on camera doing it. It was a lesson he'd never forget. The days after the incident felt like a blur to Ethan. The police had done their job. Barbara was gone from his life, and for the first time in weeks he could breathe easier. But the story wasn't over, not by a long shot. News of what happened spread quickly online. A video clip showing Barbara being led out in handcuffs went viral. It played on social media, news websites, and even late-night comedy shows. People were shocked at how far she had gone, and how fast things had turned against her. Some called it poetic justice. Others saw it as a warning. Don't mess with someone who's ready to protect themselves. Ethan didn't expect to become part of a national conversation. He never wanted to be famous, but now people were reaching out to him. Reporters asking for interviews, tech companies offering free products, and regular folks thanking him for standing up to someone who had clearly abused her power. He tried to keep a low profile at first. He avoided giving interviews and stayed off social media for a few days. But eventually, he realized something important. His experience could help others. Maybe not everyone had the same smart home setup he did, but they could still learn how to protect themselves from unfair treatment. So he started talking. At first, it was just small posts on his personal page. He shared tips on how to handle HOA issues, how to document problems properly, and why having a good security system wasn't just about stopping crime, it was also about proving your side of the story when things went wrong. People responded. Well, some asked questions. Others shared their own stories of dealing with overbearing HOA officials or nosy neighbors. Ethan read every message he got. He replied when he could, and slowly he began building a small community of people who believed in fairness, privacy, and standing up for your rights. One day, a local reporter reached out to him. She wanted to write a story about how modern technology was changing the way people dealt with disputes. Ethan agreed to talk, but only if the focus stayed on the bigger picture. Not just what happened to him, but how everyday tools like cameras and smart systems were helping ordinary people protect themselves. When the article came out, it made waves. Other news outlets picked it up. Soon, Ethan was getting calls from radio shows and even a few TV programs. He didn't accept every offer, but he did appear on a couple of morning shows where he talked calmly and clearly about his experience. He never blamed the HOA itself. He said the problem wasn't the rules or the idea of having a neighborhood committee. It was the person who had misused her position. He stressed that organizations like HOAs can work well when run by fair people, but they can cause trouble when one person thinks they have more power than they really do. His calm, reasonable tone won over many viewers. Even people who didn't know much about smart home tech found his story relatable. They saw him as someone who had been pushed too far and who had used the tools he already had to defend himself. Around this time, the HOA board finally released an official statement. They said they were sorry for what had happened and that Barbara had acted without authority. They promised to review their leadership process and make sure no one else could misuse their role like she had. They also offered to cover the cost of fixing Ethan's front door and replacing the broken lock. He accepted politely, though he told them the damage wasn't the worst part. It was the stress and fear that came with it. A few weeks later, a city council member contacted Ethan to ask if he would speak at a local meeting. The topic? How to improve communication between neighborhoods and homeowners groups. Ethan agreed, thinking this might be a chance to help prevent future problems. At the meeting, he gave a short speech. He talked about how easy it is for rules to turn into control and how important it is for people to feel safe in their own homes. He didn't call anyone out or name names. He just shared what he had learned. Afterward, several residents came up to thank him. One older man said he had been dealing with similar issues for years and had never known how to fight back. Another woman asked for advice on setting up her own home security system. Ethan left the meeting feeling hopeful. He realized that even though his experience had been stressful, it had also opened a door for conversations, for change, and maybe even for better understanding between neighbors. Back at home, he kept working on his blog. He started posting videos showing how different smart home devices work together. He explained how motion sensors, voice-activated alarms, and automatic emergency alerts could give people peace of mind, not just for safety, but for protection against false accusations or unfair treatment. He also began consulting with a few tech developers who were interested in creating smarter, more ethical home security systems. They wanted to design tools that protected people without invading privacy or causing unnecessary panic. Ethan helped them think through real-life scenarios. He suggested features like voice clarity mode, so background noise wouldn't trigger, false alarms, and calm-down timers that gave people a chance to resolve conflicts peacefully before calling the police. It was a new kind of work for him, one that mixed his love of technology with his belief in fairness. And he enjoyed it more than he expected. Still, the biggest change came in how he saw the world around him. Before all this, he thought, if you followed the rules and treated people kindly, everything would be okay. Now he knew that sometimes doing the right thing isn't enough. Sometimes you need proof, you need support, and sometimes you need to be ready when someone tries to take advantage of you. But most importantly, you need to believe that truth matters, and that with the right tools, it can win. Barbara never reached out. He never heard from her again. As far as he knew, she had left the neighborhood quietly and was trying to rebuild her life somewhere else. Ethan didn't hold any grudges. He wasn't looking for revenge. He just wanted to live in peace, like he always had. And now, thanks to a broken door, a smart home system, and a moment of standing up for himself, he finally could. Ethan's life started to settle down after the news stories stopped coming and the viral videos faded from the top of people's feeds. The neighborhood went back to being quiet. His front door was fixed, his alarm system upgraded, and for the first time in a long while, he felt like he could just live again, without looking over his shoulder. But even though the spotlight had moved on, the changes from what happened were still rippling out. The HOA board made good on their promise to review how things were run. They held a special meeting that all residents were invited to attend. Ethan wasn't required to go, but he decided to show up anyway, not to cause trouble, but to support the idea of better communication and fairness. At the meeting, several new rules were proposed. One of them limited how many complaints an HOA member could file against a single person within a certain amount of time. Another rule said that any home inspection had to be scheduled in advance and done with proper notice. And perhaps most importantly, there was now a clear process for residents to report unfair treatment by HOA officials. Ethan listened carefully as each change was discussed. Some people spoke up in favor, others asked questions, and a few old-timers grumbled about too much change. But overall, it seemed like most people agreed. Things needed to be more balanced. After the meeting, a few neighbors came up to thank him. "You did something most of us didn't have the guts to do," one man said. "You stood up for yourself and for all of us." Ethan smiled and nodded. He didn't see himself as some kind of hero, but he did believe that sometimes small actions can lead to big changes. Back at home, he kept working on his blog and YouTube channel. At first, it had been a way to explain what happened to him. Now it was turning into something more, a place where people could learn about smart home tech, personal privacy rights, and how to deal with difficult situations calmly and safely. He started getting messages from people all over the country. Some shared their own stories of dealing with aggressive HOA members or nosy neighbors. Others asked for advice on setting up their own security systems. A few even said they had used what he taught to protect themselves when someone tried to take advantage of them. One message came from a woman in Florida. She wrote that she had been dealing with a neighbor who kept making false complaints about her yard and trash bins. After watching Ethan's videos, she installed a few cameras and started recording everything. When the neighbor showed up uninvited and started taking photos of her house, she politely reminded them that they were being recorded, and the problem stopped almost overnight. Another message came from a man in Texas who worked night shifts. He said he used to worry about people walking past his house late at night, but after setting up motion lights and a voice-activated alert system, he finally felt safe enough to sleep through the night. Reading these messages made Ethan feel like what he was doing mattered. It wasn't just about technology. It was about giving people tools to feel protected and respected in their own homes. Around this time, a local radio station reached out to him again. This time, they wanted to do a short interview about how everyday people could use simple tech to stay safe. Ethan agreed, and the conversation ended up lasting longer than expected. They talked about the importance of having a plan, knowing your rights, and not letting fear control you. Ethan shared tips on which kinds of cameras worked best, how to store video securely, and why it was important to treat everyone with respect, even if they weren't treating you the same way. After the interview aired, more people found his blog. Some sent him ideas for future videos. Others offered to share their own experiences on camera. Ethan realized he was building something bigger than he had planned, so he made a decision. He would keep going. He began posting weekly updates, showing different setups and explaining how they worked. He reviewed products, gave step-by-step guides, and even answered viewer questions in short video replies. His goal wasn't to sell anything or make money. It was just to help people understand how they could use modern tools to protect themselves and their families. And slowly, people started listening. One day, a tech company reached out to him. They were developing a new smart home system and wanted his opinion on how to make it more user-friendly and secure. They flew him out for a meeting and paid for his travel. It was the first time Ethan had ever been asked to consult on something like this. He spent a full day with their team, talking about what worked well in current systems and what needed improvement. He suggested adding a feature that would let users choose how serious an alert had to be before calling emergency services. He also recommended including a way to lock down recordings so only the homeowner could access them, protecting privacy. The team took notes and thanked him. A few weeks later, they sent him a prototype of the new system to test. He posted a short video showing how it worked, and people loved seeing the behind-the-scenes look at how smart home tech was evolving. It was exciting, but even more than that, it was proof that standing up for yourself could lead to something good. Ethan never forgot where he came from. He still lived in the same house, still walked the same streets, and still liked to tinker with gadgets in his free time. But now, he saw his life differently. He wasn't just a software engineer who liked smart devices anymore. He was someone who had learned how to protect himself and who was helping others do the same. Barbara's name rarely came up anymore. The story had faded from the headlines, and people had moved on. But Ethan knew that the lessons from it hadn't disappeared. He carried them with him every day. He believed now more than ever that technology wasn't just about convenience, it was about empowerment. It wasn't just about making life easier. It was about making life safer, fairer, and more in control. And he was proud to be part of that movement. As he sat at his desk one evening, editing a new video about how to set up a basic home security system, he thought about how far he'd come. From being harassed by a neighbor to becoming a voice for others, his journey had taken a turn he never expected. But maybe, he thought, that was the point. Maybe sometimes, the only way to find your purpose is to stand your ground when someone tries to take it away. And maybe, just maybe, the truth doesn't always need to shout to be heard. Sometimes it just needs to be recorded. Ethan kept moving forward one day at a time. The excitement around his story had mostly died down, but the lessons he learned stayed with him, and with others too. His blog continued to grow. People from all over started following his advice on how to protect their homes without feeling trapped by fear. He made videos showing how to set up cameras, choose good alarm systems, and even talk calmly with neighbors when problems came up. He wasn't trying to teach people how to fight. He was teaching them how to be ready. One of the things Ethan talked about often was how important it was to stay calm, even when someone else wasn't. You can't control how other people act, he said in one of his most popular videos. But you can control how you respond, and that makes all the difference. People liked hearing that. It gave them a sense of power, not in a mean way, but in a peaceful, smart kind of way. As the months passed, Ethan found himself getting more involved in local community work. He helped organize a neighborhood safety night where people could learn about home security, meet local police officers, and ask questions in a friendly setting. The event turned out better than anyone expected. Families showed up. Kids got free bike locks and safety stickers. Officers answered questions and even gave tips on how to avoid being targeted by thieves or scammers. Afterward, several people thanked Ethan for bringing everyone together. One older woman told him, "You reminded us that we don't have to be afraid, we just need to be smart." That stuck with him. He also began speaking at small tech fairs and online events. He wasn't a famous speaker or anything like that. He was just a regular guy who had gone through something and wanted to help others avoid the same stress. At one event, a teenager asked him if he ever felt like giving up after everything that happened. Ethan thought for a moment before answering. "At first I did," he admitted. "It was tough, I didn't want to deal with any of it. But then I realized something. I couldn't let what happened define me. I could either feel like a victim, or I could use what I learned to help others. So I chose to help." The room clapped politely. A few people smiled. Back home, life went on. His house still had all its smart features, but now they weren't just for protection. They were part of his everyday life. Lights turned on when he walked into a room. Music played softly in the background. His coffee brewed automatically. In the morning. It was like living in a movie sometimes. But the best part wasn't the gadgets. It was the peace of mind. Neighbors who used to keep to themselves started saying hello again. Some even asked Ethan for advice on setting up their own simple security systems. He always offered help without making them feel like they needed an expert to live safely. He noticed that people were more open now, more willing to talk, more willing to listen, and that, he realized, was the real change. Barbara's name came up less and less. A few people still joked about her online, but Ethan never joined in. He believed in letting go of anger when it stopped, helping. He didn't wish her harm. He just hoped she had learned something too. He heard from a neighbor once that she had moved away quietly. No big goodbye, no apology, just gone. Ethan didn't miss her. But he did think about what had led to everything, how one person's need for control had caused so much trouble. He didn't blame her entirely. He knew that power, when given to the wrong person, could twist even normal behavior into something unfair. That's why he kept talking about rules and balance, not just for HOA groups, but for any place where people are in charge of others. He believed that fairness should always come before authority. One day he got a message from a young man who had just moved into his first apartment. He wrote that he had watched Ethan's videos and decided to install a basic camera system and motion lights. Then, not long after, someone tried to break in. Thanks to the flashing lights and loud alert, the person ran off before doing any damage. The young man said he felt safe because of what he had learned from Ethan's videos. Ethan read that message twice. Then he replied with a thank you and a short piece of advice. Stay smart, stay calm, and remember, you're in charge of your space. That became a kind of motto for his channel. He started putting it at the end of every video. People loved it. Some even printed it out and stuck it on their fridges or desks. Another big change came when Ethan was invited to speak at a local school. It wasn't about technology this time. It was about standing up for yourself and knowing your rights. He talked to students about how to handle bullies, how to speak up when something feels wrong, and how to use tools like phones and apps responsibly to protect themselves. He didn't tell them to record every conversation or spy on people. He told them to be aware, to trust their instincts, and to know that asking for help isn't weakness, it's wisdom. After the talk, a teacher pulled him aside and said, "You really reached them today." That meant more to Ethan than any online fame ever could. He left the school feeling hopeful. If kids could learn these things early, maybe the world would be a little better someday. Back home, he sat down at his desk and opened his laptop. He checked his messages, responded to a few emails, and looked at the latest video he was working on. It was about how to de-escalate arguments with nosy neighbors. He filmed it in his backyard, sitting in a chair with a cup of coffee, speaking in a calm voice. It wasn't flashy or dramatic. It was just him, sharing what he had learned. He uploaded it later that night. By morning, it already had hundreds of views. Ethan smiled, leaned back in his chair, and took a deep breath. He had been through a lot. He had faced something scary, but now he was using that experience to make life better, for himself and for others. And that, he thought, was exactly how it was supposed to go, because sometimes the best way to heal is to help. And sometimes the loudest truth doesn't come from shouting. Sometimes it comes from recording, learning, and moving forward together.